Let's talk about why Mormonism has such a pervasive impact on mental health. I'm Ashley, I'm a licensed therapist.
So first, I actually want to agree with this therapist. There is something that's perpetuated in LDS culture that is very damaging, and it needs to stop now. One of my pinned videos, if you look at the top, is actually how to help your children escape trauma as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And you can see, I think it's one of my top videos up there. But one of the things that this therapist mentions is very important. And this is the concept that if someone sexually abuses someone else, that the person who is the victim of the sexual abuse is now impure or defiled or bad or something like this. There was even one of the authors in the Book of Mormon that described it in this way. How the people are doing bad things and that they defiled the person. What's actually happening in the way that Christ explains it, he says, not that which, goeth into a man defile him, but that which cometh out of his mouth. It's what you do that defiles you. And so the person that abused the victim, they're defiled for what they did. But the victim is not, they didn't do anything bad. They're not anything but a victim. They're not a sinner. They've done nothing wrong. And there has been some language by leaders and members alike that have perpetuated this idea. And I don't know where it comes from. I think it probably comes from Victorian era purity that a lot of members of the church have inherited from their Protestant roots, which probably comes from their Catholic roots. It probably goes back for a long time. But I think it's rooted in evil. You should be very, very careful never to use language like this that in any way would make a victim of abuse feel like they have done anything wrong, or there's anything wrong with them, or they're somehow defiled or impure now, because they're not. The abuser is defiled, not the abused. So, in that way, I'm actually really glad that this therapist is doing this work, because it's raising awareness of this issue. I create content for members of the church, for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and so here I am. I'm spreading the word. Stop it. Do not use any of this language. There are 1 in 4 girls are victims of sexual abuse. That is a massive population. And if our church, anyone in our church, any leader, anybody ever teaches that someone is defiled because someone abused them, this has to stop. You need to clear this up. Please see my other pinned video that I talk about how to raise your children without religious trauma. Summarizing it very briefly, don't force them to live your religion. Don't guilt them into living your religion. Don't fear them into living your religion. Don't anger them into living your religion. You can live your religion. You can share why you like to live your religion. Don't misrepresent other groups of people. You can encourage them to live religion. Ask them if they want encouragement. But if they don't want encouragement, don't force it on them. Not only does doing any of these things cause religious trauma, even if I understand your intentions are in the right place. You want your children to go to the celestial kingdom. You want all these things for them. But all these techniques of using fear and anger and things, and I've made mistakes too as a parent, okay? I'm learning as well. All of us are. I'm not trying to make anybody feel terrible here. I'm just trying to teach and share some things I've learned. It's better for your children to be provided with the opportunity and let them use their agency to decide how they're going to approach their own spirituality or not spirituality than to try and force it on them. I might have the most delicious cake in the world, but if I try to ram it down your throat, you're going to spit it out of my face. And this happens a lot. If you force your children to use your same standards. Now, of course, you can have house rules. You don't want people doing drugs and drinking alcohol and running around naked or whatever in your house. That's fine. But I'm talking about like the way that you observe the Sabbath day, for example, or whatever else. If you attempt to ram this down their throats and force it upon them or guilt it upon them or fear it upon them or anger it upon them, manipulating their emotions to get them to do things that you think that they should be doing, it's going to backfire. And it might not backfire right now. It might backfire when they're 40 years old and they have all this like fear and anger and trauma associated with something having to do with their church, and then they're like, oh my gosh, why do I feel this way? And then they go see a therapist. I have all this fear and anger. And the therapist is like, oh, it's because your parents like angered and feared and pressured and guilted you into living this way. And guess what? Now the church, the teachings of Jesus Christ, which are supposed to be all about love and kindness and tolerance and goodness, they're all associated with guilt and fear and anger in their mind. And you've ruined the gospel for them. You've ruined what would be a beautiful, beautiful message about love. And you turn it into guilt and anger and fear. We can do better, and we need to do better as members of Jesus Christ, of his church. We're supposed to be the hands of Jesus Christ and the mouth of Jesus Christ. That's what being part of the church means. And if we're using all anger and guilt and fear, that's not the mouth of Jesus Christ. If we're using our hands to force things on other people, that was not Christ's plan. That was Satan's plan, to force things on people. We can do better. We need to do better. So I thank the therapist for pointing this out. And one thing I would say, one therapist to another, and really anybody who's watching her content, and for her and anybody else's content, watch out for sampling bias. So for example, let's say that all the people that come and see you in your particular clinic are usually people that are traumatized or depressed or anxious. And that has a very high correlation with sexual abuse or really horrible parenting or lots of other things like this. Parents who are members of the church who use guilt and fear and anger to control. Now recognize, you as a therapist do not see everyone in the LDS population. Not all parents take this approach. That's not the standard approach, at least not based on my experience of being in thousands of members' homes. Most general conference talks are about love, about Jesus. So anyways, if you're getting this particular sampling in your practice, it might seem like this is the standard thing as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it might make it appear, since you're working in this area with this population group, that you think, oh, this must be the standard of the way the church members are. I work in an area, I've worked in Missouri and Ohio, and in those areas that I've worked, I think I had like one, maybe two patients that were LDS. The other hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that I've seen have been all kinds of other demographics. And I can fall victim to the same thing. Look at other groups. Oh, wow, all these other groups are doing so awful because they're all not members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If they were all members of the church, they'd be so much happier, and there'd be way less sexual abuse, and there'd be way less drug use, and way less alcohol use, and it'd be a more loving, wonderful environment. None of these people would have any sort of mental health problems. They'd all be happy, and they'd have low anxiety and low depression. But you got to recognize, I'm getting the sampling of the people in society that are struggling. And so for me to take that and then generalize it to all the atheists is not fair. It might be tempting for me to say, oh wow, pretty much all atheists are addicted to drugs and alcohol. Pretty much all atheists seem like they're abusing their children. And that's a sampling bias. That's not a fair thing to do. And so you're in a similar population where most people are probably LDS, and you can fall victim to sampling bias. So just be careful of that. Be very careful not to spread bigotry and harmful sweeping generalizations of a population that are not actually representative of what most of the people do and believe, or how most of them act. With medical professionals and mental health professionals, we get a certain percentage of the population, and sometimes we can generalize that to the whole. Like, wow, nobody's happy out there. Nobody's living. Everybody's addicted to alcohol. Everybody's addicted to drugs. Everybody's being sexually abused, and that's not actually accurate. One of the communities that I was in had a very largely Catholic population. I could have done the same thing with generalizing. Another one, I had a very large atheist population. Could have the same kind of sampling bias and generalization. You've got to protect yourself from that, and then be very careful not to spread bigotry about a group and misrepresent a group based on the sampling bias that you have. I worry that some of your videos are kind of leaning that way, and so be careful, please. Because there's also another form of trauma that comes, something that I grew up with. I grew up in an area that was not in Utah, not predominantly LDS, where people would dehumanize me and treat me horribly and say awful things about me that were totally wrong, mischaracterizations, purely because I was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It was really harmful for me, gave me lots of panic attacks, lots of anxiety. It was extremely distressing for me for most of my life. So please be careful not to create that trauma for other people too. So thank you for your videos and your content. And those are some thoughts. I hope that's helpful. Last thought, look at the story of Enos. What motivated Enos to embrace his religion? It was the joy of the saints, not guilt, not fear, not anger. Think about that.